G'day everybody. I'm just going to try and work out some stuff. Can everybody see me and hear me? If you're looking at the chat, just give me a hoy. I can't see anything with this. So I'm going to just check over here. I can see myself and I can hear myself. And I'm just going to check to make sure that the video works. Let's use that one.
Early Years Assessment and Learning Tool is an evidence-based tool designed to support all children in funded 3 and 4-year-old kindergarten programs to have the best start in life.
Cool. All right. You can't hear me. Dang. It might be just you. All right. Comments. Yes, there we are. Sorry, I'm learning this as I go. Okay. So you can hear me okay, good. You can see me, the thing works. Happy birthday. Sorry about that. This is the first time I'm using this program. Probably should have done a dry run. And I feel quite nervous. And I'm also probably unprepared. So what we're talking about today is we're talking about the Australian National Curriculum. So the curriculum is coming into effect this year that I know of. It's a fully formed curriculum. And it's been the process since 2008 being developed and staggeringly implemented over time. And the curriculum has, when it first came out, 2010, 2011, 2012, there was a bit of controversy, but there really hasn't been a lot in the news, at least, anything controversial about the curriculum. But what I'm going to show you tonight is that the curriculum is much to be feared. It is from the 7th level of hell, basically. And we're going to go through why it's so bad. But first, I want to let's get into, what are we really talking about, okay? So what is education? So education is basically teaching and learning, education is teaching and learning when you're young, or they're young, to be equipped with everything they're going to need for adult life. That's a very pragmatic definition of education. It's from Stephen Hicks, who's a renowned philosopher. And what is a curriculum? So there's a guy called Martin Cothram. He's an editor of a magazine called The Classical Teacher. He's obviously teaches the classics and goes for a classical pedagogy, which means more than just learning. Pedagogy means bringing someone up with everything that they're going to need. You're basically reproducing yourself when you're a pedagogue. Anyway, Martin Cothram, authoritative guy. He's an instructor of Latin, logic, rhetoric, and he's the senior policy analyst at the Family Foundation in Kentucky in America. And he says, a curriculum is an organized and coherent grade by grade course of studies. A whole curriculum implies a unifying principle, something that makes the parts in this particular arrangement a different thing than it would be if the parts were under some other principle, parts being subjects, I suppose. Cothram said in the interview that education is to pass on your culture. Stephen Hicks's quote is, the process of learning and teaching the young the knowledge and skills necessary for adulthood. There's a guy in the history of education, especially in America, called John Dewey. And he was the founder of what's known as progressive education, which sort of took over from a more classical approach. And John Dewey said that schools should take an active part in directing social change and share in the construction of a new social order. So you can see socialism coming in and secularism. I've got some videos to show you, and that's going to be how we're going to engage with the material. But I want to talk about ACARA. So ACARA is an acronym. It's for the Australian Curriculum Assessment and Reporting Authority. Basically, they're the board of, basically the school board of Australia. So they were in charge of developing the curriculum. They'll be in charge of disciplining any teachers or principals or whatever it is to do with schools in the under the national curriculum. The national curriculum is Australia-wide. No school is exempt except for, I think, 2 types of schools. You can't really create your own school in Australia, or at least in Victoria. You can homeschool, but all the schools, Christian schools, private schools, obviously public schools, are going to be under this curriculum. So in 2012, someone who works from ACARA called Louise Zamati, she was an executive member of the New South Wales History Teachers Association. She obviously worked on the curriculum. She said that the open, democratic, consultative approach to curriculum development described by Chris Pine, who was claiming that the history curriculum, the curriculum for the history, was biased. This is Zamati again. Ensured that partisan politics and politicians were excluded because the curriculum was largely the work of curriculum designers and practicing educators. No single political ideology was allowed to dominate the substantive knowledge base of the subject. She's talking about history. Writers and advisors were more concerned with pedagogy rather than ideology. Differences of opinions centered on such issues as at what age children are cognitively capable of understanding chronological constructs of time, such as BC or AD. So this is what she said. An insider has said that the concern was the style of pedagogy, and the differences of opinion were at what age. So developmental issues with what they were arguing over, if they argued over anything. So that implies that nobody developing the curriculum was worried about what type of pedagogy they were going with. If you're late, pedagogy is the process of teaching, but it's more than that. It's bringing up someone with a worldview, a way of being. You're basically passing on, you're trying to grasp the wisdom of the pedagogue. The student is trying to grasp all the wisdom out of the teacher. Before we go to a video of Akara, I want to give you a Bible verse that I think is really important. This is Jesus. He's talking to his disciples. It's in the book of Luke, chapter 6, 39 to verse 42. It says, "Can a blind man lead a blind man? Will they not both fall into a pit? A disciple," meaning a learner, "is not above his teacher, but everyone, when he's fully trained, will be like his teacher. Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but you do not notice the log that is in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, 'Brother, let me take out the speck that is in your eye,' when you yourself do not see the log that is in your own eye? You hypocrites! First take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck that is in your brother's eye." Now, a lot of people think that is a moral verse, but I'm going to suggest to you that what he's just told you is a really important principle for pedagogy. Now, there's a lot of stuff here, and we're not going to go into it, but I'm going to say that from these verses, I would say be very careful who you allow to teach yourself, and be extremely careful whom you allow to teach your children. Because if it's metaphorically a blind man, perhaps you'll be led into a pit. Let's go to this first video. This is from Akara.
Basis of Akara's authority. The first is that Akara has been established by an act of a democratically elected parliament. And so Akara's very existence is the result of a democratic process, and we bring to our role the authority of that democratic process, the authority of the people. We've been tasked by the Australian Parliament to do what we do. Secondly, at Akara, we aim to exercise the authority that has been given to us in a way that honours that democratic process and is faithful to it. So we want to be an authority in the best sense of the word, a trusted source of information for all those who are interested in and invested in the learning of our young Australian citizens. In other words, we want to be authoritative rather than authoritarian. And this means we have to listen to stakeholders and collaborate with them. But there are other functions that education serves, other values, social values, cultural values, and personal values. And I want to take a little bit of time to talk about those. So in terms of its social function, education is really important in helping us be socialised, learning how to get on with people, to cooperate, to collaborate, learning what it means to interact in and participate in ever-widening groups. Then there is education and how it operates as a culturally important function. It helps us understand the society that we live in, how it came to be the way it is, how our own sense of being part of a community is shaped and nurtured through our communal history, through things like creative art and literature, and religion and science over thousands and thousands of years. So education serves that cultural function. In doing so, in serving that cultural function, education is helping us grapple with the big questions about the meaning and purpose of life, and inducting us into the answers to those questions that society that we live in, what answers does it give to those questions? But ultimately, what we need as individuals to do is to come to our own sense of what our own lives mean and what purpose is going to drive us forward in the way we live our life. And education is crucial to that. But we need to remember that we are not just the products of our physical circumstances, of our society and our culture. Those things might shape us, but they don't determine us. We need to become our own person. And this is where education functions at the level of personal values, helping us to become people of integrity and of authenticity and wisdom. And so when education functions at that personal level, it empowers us to be agents of change so that we can become fully rounded human beings, better human beings, and that we can help make our world a better place. So simultaneously, education not only serves the purposes of social and cultural continuity in one sense, it also serves the purpose of social and cultural change. And what ultimately education is about is helping young people understand that they have minds and that they can use them to shape the world and themselves to become better.
Okay, so do you think that ACARA are going for a classical pedagogy where a curriculum is organized in a coherent way so that they can pass on the Western Christian worldview that was established in Australia? Or do you think maybe that they're going after John Dewey's schools should take an active part in directing social change and share in the construction of a new social order? Did you hear anything about kids being intelligent and being educated? Well, let's talk about that a little further. You might remember, if you're in Victoria, something called the Safe Schools program. It was developed by the La Trobe University, care of a person called Ros Ward and a guy called Joel Radcliffe. Now, Radcliffe was a former teacher, is understood to have joined the education department in recent weeks. This is a news article. When the Australian contacted him at his office yesterday, his voicemail message revealed his role to be the project leader of respectful relationships for the Hume Moreland region of Melbourne's north. Despite its aim of reducing family violence, Respectful Relationships has attracted similar controversy to Safe Schools due to its reliance on gender theory, feminist ideology, teaching students about male privilege, and that masculinity is responsible for family violence. Unlike Safe Schools, which was targeted at Year 7 students onwards, Respectful Relationships education will begin at preschool level. Where's that from? It's from the Australian, 2017. So, Ros Ward, controversial figure, tried to be elected to local council in Northcote, I think, a few years ago. Now, in 2013, she put up a Twitter quote, and this is her quote: "I don't just teach people how to be gay, I teach them how to be gay and communist." Caused a bit of a stir. Now, if you understand the context of pedagogy and where we're going, this quote doesn't mean that school or Safe Schools is about teaching children, all children, to be gay. The quote's obviously out of context. What this quote means is she's revealing the type of pedagogy that is being accepted by the Victorian Education and Training, which is critical to understanding the national curriculum, because it's based on the Melbourne Declaration that was published in 2008. So if the Victorian education system has accepted Safe Schools, then this method of pedagogy is obviously where they're going. So consider Louisa Marty from ACARA. She said the only disagreements were about child development stages, not pedagogy. Everybody agreed with the pedagogy. There's really only one Marxist education model that everything sort of fits, and that's a guy called Paulo Freire. It's kind of a weird spelling. and he calls it critical pedagogy. Freire wrote a book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and The Politics of Education. He wrote a lot of other things too. He spent time exiled from his home country in Brazil and was a pseudo-Catholic in the sense that Freire synthesized Marxism and Christianity. It's called liberation theology. He was part of the World Council of Churches at the UN. He was employed at Stanford University? No. One of the big universities in the United States. He spent some time in Australia in the 70s. He was someone who was very popular in the UN, World Council of Churches, and spent a lot of time there. He said this: all education is political. In true dialectical style, Freire wipes away traditional education models by calling it a banking model. You'll see this, and I want you to note that the videos that I'm going to show you have obvious additions from me, which is some overlays with some writing. All the videos are sped up for time, and also the videos are cut, so they're not the full video. But if you're interested in getting some of the originals, I can get you them, because I thought the primary documents were more important than me sitting here telling you everything. Harvard Divinity School, that's where he works for a little while. Yeah. So who is Paulo Freire? I think the best thing to do would be to back up, because we're obviously in Marxist land, right? So I need to tell you about critical theory, because this is going to be a major part of the Australian National Curriculum. So I've got this video. All of the videos are fairly short. I've tried to make it as short as I can. The absolute longest one, and I'll warn you before it's on, I think is about 6 or 7 minutes. But most of them are 1 or 2 or 3 minutes. So this is a video. Oh, before we show that video, let's show the video from ACARA, where it actually tells you the final version of the curriculum that will be implemented this year. So this is the ACARA video about the Australian National Curriculum.
The Australian curriculum has 3 dimensions: learning areas, general capabilities, and cross-curriculum priorities. Of the 3 dimensions, the learning areas are the foundation of the Australian curriculum. They identify the essential content that teachers should teach and we want students to learn. The other 2 dimensions, the general capabilities and cross-curriculum priorities, are developed through the content of the learning area and aren't separate areas to be taught. Each learning area has a similar format, which makes it easier for teachers when they are planning their teaching program. Each learning area begins with an introductory section, which has the rationale and aims giving overall intent of the learning area, a description of how the content is organised, the key connections with other learning areas, general capabilities and cross-curriculum priorities, and key considerations to enable teachers to create effective teaching and learning programs. The next section is curriculum content, which includes content descriptions that detail the essential knowledge, understanding and skills for students to learn, and the achievement standards that describe what students should typically demonstrate by the end of each year or band of years. These 2 parts of the curriculum are the core components that teachers will use to plan, teach, and assess students' learning. Teachers can find additional guidance in the level descriptions, which provide an overview of the learning that students should experience at each year or band level. Finally, the curriculum includes content elaborations, which build on each content description. Though the elaborations are intended only as examples, they do contain valuable suggestions for teachers to use when they are delivering each content description. The connections between the learning areas and the other 2 dimensions, the general capabilities and cross-curriculum priorities, are explained in the content descriptions and content elaborations in each learning area. The general capabilities reflect the understanding and skills that students need to be confident and creative individuals, lifelong learners, and active citizens. They are taught through the relevant learning areas. Therefore, in the introductory key connections section, there is specific guidance about the best fit between the learning area and the general capabilities. Not all general capabilities will be developed in every learning area. They will only be included in learning area content where they can be developed in authentic and meaningful ways. The cross-curriculum
one
priorities
to,
that make up the third dimension
pay
of the Australian curriculum ensure that content is current and relevant. These priorities give students the chance to focus on content with regional, national, and global significance. Each learning area's key connections section has advice on which cross-curriculum priorities have strong relationships. The priorities will be embedded into the content where they provide the most authentic and meaningful contexts to add depth to the learning area content. For example, the sustainability cross-curriculum priority is woven through science, the humanities and social sciences, and technologies curriculum, while the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander history and culture priority can be applied across all learning areas and subjects for a deeper understanding of Australia's history in the world's oldest living culture. This particular cross-curriculum priority also gives Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students the opportunity to see themselves, their cultures, and their identities reflected in what they're taught to drive deeper engagement in their learning.
Okay. So you've got the core components, which is the traditional subjects. Now, that to me is what's supposed to be in school. But you've got all these other things that are added in because it's quite complicated, isn't it? Why is it so complicated? Well, it's probably got to do with what the chair of ACARA said. School is trying to create change. So pay attention to the language in these videos because you'll notice some keywords coming out and hopefully you'll be able to follow me as we go through. Now we'll go to the video on critical theory in education.
On critical pedagogy. So we're going to start with the basics of critical theory and move into how this impacts schooling. And so that leads us to critical theory in education and how we develop this idea of critical pedagogy. Very large concept that includes a lot of different theories and ideas. So this is to get you thinking. This is a common used quote in education. Everybody's a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid. And that's a lot of people attribute that to Albert Einstein. I believe he's the person that said it. And the idea here is that we're questioning education as a whole. And is it set up to actually serve everyone correctly?
So education
that's where we're exploring in these ideas here. And that's kind of where we get to this idea of critical and what it means to be critical. Now, there are some definitions here, and I want you to go ahead and pause it and read through them. Okay, so our first definition here talked about something that is crucial, judged, analyzed. The next one talked about making judgments. And if we think about that as our purpose, when we say critical theory, we are being critical, we're analyzing, we're judging something, and we're trying to identify flaws, not in a super negative way or in a depressing way, but in a way to correct problems, right? So the whole attitude of using critical theory in education will kind of help you. Basically, a big part of critical theory relies upon how power exists and how power tries to maintain itself. And one aspect of this is through economic means, as you can see. Critical theory also impacts many other topics in our modern sociological perspectives. So these are some of the common topics that get talked about in sociology and other fields because of critical theory. And so now we get to education. So if we started with conflict theory, which is one theory within sociology, and I'm not going to get deep into that because I'm not a sociology expert, but you can go look that up. Conflict theory just basically has to do with analyzing the ways inequalities contribute to differences and perpetuate power. And then we have what birthed out of that is critical theory, which we've been talking about.
Which
so
is
critical theory, then if you have a basic understanding of that now, we can look at how would that impact how we view schooling. And so we can come up with this broad field of critical pedagogy. And so if we're going to approach education from a critical stance, we have other theories that kind of evolve from that. One of the major ones that impacts education is critical race theory. Another big one that seems to rely upon critical theory is social capital. And so from those, we get very specific kinds of teaching sort of theories, but they are all rooted in critical theory. So we have culturally sustaining pedagogy, culturally responsive teaching, anti-racist education, the problem posing versus the banking model, which you read with Freire, funds of knowledge. All these are specific teaching theories, but they are rooted in sociological theories that are all stemmed from critical theory. Big web that keeps going. So with critical theory, we can start talking about things like power, oppression, intersectionality, social capital. So these are things that definitely reach their way into education. And once they get there and we start questioning how our systems of education impact students and how they interact with that system, we also can question who has the power and how do we look at that power and criticize the use of that power and how that impacts students' lives. And so one major area you should be thinking about as an educator is culturally sustaining pedagogy.
Okay. So I hope you noticed words like power, like culturally sustaining, decolonization, all these things. All of the critical theories are Marxist. Doesn't matter what it is. All critical theories are Marxist. Critical race theory, critical gender theory, queer theory, a whole slew of them. It's basically taking the idea of Marx, well, it's actually the idea of Hegel about a dialectic, but it's applying power dynamics to any situation. So I'm oppressing my computer because my computer is doing my work for me. It's supporting me to do my work. It's not doing its own work. Therefore, I'm oppressing my computer and my computer is oppressed. And we need to find a way to undo that because I'm dehumanizing my computer by making it work for me. And in the process of dehumanizing my computer, I'm dehumanizing myself so that I'm an animal. And I need to be stopped. And that's the morality of Marxism. They will do anything they need to do to achieve what they call emancipation or liberation. And they're always the oppressed. And you are usually the oppressor. So let's move into Paulo Freire. What did he talk about? Because this is the real nuts and bolts. I'm sure that you're going to see how Freire's model is the model of the Australian National Curriculum, and that the cross-curriculum priorities will be the generative themes that get brought up for Freirean dialogue. I'm touching the wrong thing. Let's get to Freire.
Meet Paulo Freire, the founder of critical pedagogy. Freire was born in 1921 in Recife, Brazil. His ideas about the role of education in political freedom eventually became some of the most significant contributions to what's now known as critical pedagogy. In 1947, Freire became the director of the Department of Education and Culture and began conducting literacy programs for poor adults. It was during this time that he developed his major ideas about the relationship between oppression, literacy, and educational praxis. Freire's educational philosophy harshly criticizes what he terms the banking model of education, which sees students as passive, empty receptacles to be filled by the wise, all-knowing teacher. Freire linked this model of education to the socioeconomic and political relationship between oppressor and oppressed, which he experienced firsthand during his years of poverty and hunger. Building off of Hegel, Marx, and others, Freire's ontology states that the ultimate goal of all persons is to increase, not decrease, their humanity. In the same way that the colonizer thinks his own ways are always best, the teacher who sees students as hollow vessels is participating in a process that discourages critical thought, perpetuates oppression, and dehumanizes both. Freire proposed in his most famous work, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, published in 1967, that effective education is built upon a democratic relationship between equals who are open to learning from one another. This teacher-student relationship is what allows conscientização, the critical awareness that precedes action, to develop in oppressed peoples over time. Conscientização begins with students becoming aware of the contradictions in their social, political, economic, gender, race, and class conditions, and then taking action to resolve those contradictions. In Freire's so-called problem-posing education, teachers problematize each issue discussed in class. Students then pose their own solutions. Teacher and students then work together in both goal and process to successfully change the conditions of oppression and ultimately achieve the democratic ideal of freedom and equality for all. Dialogue is the basis for all problem-posing pedagogy and requires solidarity, a sense of equal footing, and mutual respect. Freire wrote in his later works that education is fundamentally an act of love.
On problem-posing pedagogue, ideal method of education. As we can see, Freire is widely known for his radical educational ideas called critical pedagogy. Critical pedagogy is described as an educational movement guided by the passion and principle to help students develop consciousness of freedom, recognize authoritarian tendencies, and connect knowledge to power and the ability to take constructive action. It also enables people to overcome their false perception of reality. This overcoming of the false perception of reality is considered the true measurement of growth. Freire argues that freedom from alienation is impossible without dialogical relations between the student and the teacher. For Freire, it is only dialogue that ensures student-teacher relationship in which the teacher is no longer merely the one who teaches, but one who is himself taught in dialogue with the students, who in turn, while being taught, also teach. They become jointly responsible for a process in which all grow. Freire also argues that dialogue promotes critical thinking because it is only through questioning the problems in our lives that we can take steps to remake them. Therefore, to be an active participant in the community, one needs to be in constant dialogue with the state and within the state, that is, with the other members of the state. It is therefore through dialogue that we can attain critical consciousness. But it must be noted that for Freire, critical consciousness does not only include apprehending the inequalities in one's life, but also taking action in order to change them. Critical consciousness, then, entails both consciousness and praxis, taking practical action to deal with oppressive realities in life. Therefore, Freire believes that the problem-posing method along with critical consciousness and praxis lead to education as the practice of freedom. In sum, the central theme of Freire's pedagogy is critical consciousness and praxis, that is, the act of becoming aware of inequalities and taking action to change them. Hence, dialogue, for Freire, helps us denounce the structures of oppression and seek a less unjust, less cruel, more democratic, less discriminatory, less racist, less sexist world. And for Freire, it can only happen if we, through dialogue and critical thinking, challenge the oppressor, and in so doing create a democratic society where people willingly engage in never-ending dialogues, listen to each other, ask questions, critically think, take positions in regard to these questions, and in so doing oppose the inequalities in their lives. This is what Freire calls active learning.
So it's a bit repetitive, hey? So basically, what we're talking about here is not how good someone is at doing differential equations. We're not talking about how good someone is, at what level are they reading. We're talking about training children from 3-year-old kinder upwards, because that's the scope of the national curriculum. We're training them in a model to get them to discuss with their teachers social issues in a way where the teacher and the student can come together and pose solutions to these problems. That's the Freirean model. It's not about reading, it's not about writing, it's not about math, it's not about history. So if someone came to the Australian curriculum, they read the history, they read the math section, they probably wouldn't have a problem with it at all. The facts and the figures, they probably wouldn't have a problem. It is in the model of the teacher-student relationship and the dialogues that ensue. There's a very implicit, intimate relationship where the teacher is supposed to open up with the student and the student is supposed to open up with the teacher. And the teacher presents certain problems that they've gleaned out of the lesson to the students, and they have a dialogue with each other. You might even have noticed when the student has a conversation with the state, and then the state talks to the other state, and then everybody in this. That's another way of saying communism. That's what this is. This is Freire is a communist. He's a Marxist, and he's come up with a style of pedagogy that is quite manipulative. And I believe that that's the model of pedagogy that the Australian curriculum is based on. Not only is the goal, so into the school comes a child. And in Freire's model, out of the school comes a person who is educated. And for Freire, educated means he can politically read, he can politically do math, he can politically do all things. He can read a situation critically, and that means like a Marxist, looking for the power dynamics dialectically. So out of an Australian curriculum school will come activists, and you heard it. You heard it with Akara. Akara's choice of what school model they want to take. It wasn't all about high quality education, could do, university maths in year 12 or whatever. It's not about excellence and honor and all those other old ideas. It was about change, being equipped to help make the world a better place. That's how you become a better person, by going through these schools. They're making better people who make a better world. It's all very scary. So let's look at another Akara worker, this time a lady from Queensland. She is going to give you some pointers about how to embed some of the cross-curriculum priorities into the lesson plans of the subjects.
Curriculum priority, which is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and culture. So we're going to start with what are the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures? Well, basically, in a nutshell, it's history, it's culture, it's knowledge, tradition, worldview, all of our values, beliefs, and experiences. What makes up our identity as Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people. Now, you might in mathematics talk about statistics of the percentage of full-time students in Queensland state schools when it comes to our student numbers. Is it 3%? Is it 10%? That is one way that you can incorporate our cultures and our histories into the classroom in a math subject. And then that third area, which is your cross-curriculum priorities, where we are focusing on for the purpose of this video. It's really important that we embed it because they are one of the three dimensions of the Australian curriculum, like I mentioned. So schools are actually required to embed that into their practices. It is not an assessed learning area because it is a part of the three dimensions of the Australian curriculum. It is required by teachers to embed cross-curricular priorities, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures into their curriculum. It's also, building on the educational goals of the Melbourne Declaration. So teachers will know what I'm talking about here. The three main points of this is creating successful learners, confident and creative individuals, and active and informed citizens. So by embedding it into the curriculum, what you're doing is you're building on these educational goals. It's designed for all students to engage in reconciliation, respect, and recognition of the world's oldest continuous living cultures. We should also embed it because it's part of our strategy, the Department of Education, every Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander student succeeding strategy. And so it's one of our priorities. The three areas that we have are connection to culture, high expectations, and meaningful pathways. So like our Assistant Director General Dave Hartley has said, if we take care of these priorities, like connection to culture, then everything else will take care of itself. It helps you to meet professional standards. So we've got focus areas in our professional standards for teachers, and this cross-curriculum priority, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures, actually focuses on the area 1.4, which is strategies for teaching Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students, and focus area 2.4, which is understanding and respecting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to promote reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. And last but not least, we want to embed Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures into our curriculum because we have a moral obligation. We are standing on the land of generations of ancestors. We are standing on the grounds of traditional owners and custodians of this land, and we have that moral obligation to show our respect, to acknowledge that they have a distinctive place in our national narrative, that it's an undeniable history in our nation. And so that takes us working together and doing things like embedding the curriculum with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures. So who can support you?
Indeed, who can support you? So at this point, I want to say, is it wrong for someone to learn about Aboriginal histories and cultures? No. I want to learn about Aboriginal histories and cultures. I want to talk to Aboriginal people. I am interested in those subjects. Does that mean that we should embed them into a maths lesson? No. School is about learning how to do functions and things that you don't know. Freire was absolutely wrong about his sweeping idea about all school systems. In Freire's model, all school systems are crap except for his, which is really frustrating. So this is how this works. You go into a maths class, and let's say they're doing word problems, and they say, Billy was driving with his mother and father to a fun park. They had already traveled 30 kilometers, and the fun park was 50 kilometers away from their home. How long do they have to go? Now, obviously, it's very simple. 50 minus 30 equals 20. 20 kilometers to go. But before you get there, the teacher says, how many of you have been to a fun park? And in a class, maybe everyone puts out their hands, maybe some people don't. Who hasn't been to a fun park? And maybe one or two people put their hands up, or maybe more. They say, why do you think some people can go to a fun park and some people can't? Or, why haven't you been able to go to a fun park? Oh, my parents say it's too expensive. Eventually it gets round to some sort of generative theme that the teacher grabs onto and wants to have a conversation. It might be, has anyone gone with their mother and father to a fun park before? Does everybody have mother and father? You can see how just some of the aspects of this math question, this simple math question, can lead into generative themes. Now, in the cross-curriculum priorities, priority, by the way, means something that's more important than other things. The cross-curriculum priorities, there's Aboriginal histories and cultures, there's Asia-Australian relations, or basically our region. We have to follow our regional leader and learn about them. And then the third is global, which is the sustainability goals, the 17 sustainability goals, which basically encompasses everything from gender, race, poverty, water, climate change, everything. 17 of those goals. Maybe I can show you. Let's put up a slide from my computer, upload a file. Let's see. Here we go. It won't let me do it. Curses. No, won't let me. Maybe I have a video. I do have a video, but do you really want to see a video? I won't show you. 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Basically, any conversation can be had by doing that. But notice what that does, right? In the average class session, however much time you've prioritized to do class math, you might get 10 math problems out of the way. But now, all of a sudden, with these generative themes and these cross-curriculum priorities, you're not doing 10 math problems. You're doing maybe 2 math problems and having a big, long political discussion about Aboriginals, or about poverty, or about family structures, or about economics, family economics. This model of education destroyed Brazil. You can see why people in America are really worried about this stuff. I mean, imagine if you're having a conversation about literature and you can't actually talk about the book because you're always off in these other generative themes. The teacher is leading the students off the topic. That is what these cross-curriculum priorities do. This is what Freirean model does. It uses, Freire used reading, learning to read, as a guise, as a facade for radicalizing the poor in Brazil. And that's what this model is designed to do. So how is ACARA going to hide the fact that academically kids are graduating year 12 not knowing what they need to know? How is ACARA going to explain that when they come up for review as the numbers start to come up in the next 5 to 10 years?
ICSEA is an index that expresses the level of socio-educational advantage of students in a school. Students' level of socio-educational advantage generally affect their levels of educational achievement. It also influences other outcomes. ICSEA is calculated using information on parents' education and occupation. It also takes into account other data, such as the proportion of students who are Indigenous and the extent of the school's geographic remoteness. The Commonwealth Government requires all schools to collect this information, and this information is then used by ACARA. ICSEA has been set with a mean of 1,000 and a standard deviation of 100. A school with an index of 1,200 has students who, on average, are 2 standard deviations above the national mean level of socio-educational advantage. On average, these students come to school with a great level of advantage. A school with an index of 800 or below, however, works with students with considerable socio-educational disadvantage.
Reads that
It would be
privilege.
very unfair to compare the performances of such schools, since the socio-educational backgrounds of their students are so different. Tailored testing automatically adapts to a student's performance and allows each student to demonstrate their knowledge with questions that match their test performance. So how does tailored testing work? Students are presented with questions based on their performance during the test. Many of the test questions are of mid-range difficulty for each year level, but some are of higher or lower complexity. Students answer an initial set of questions and are then directed to subsequent questions based on the accuracy of their responses. For example, students who struggle with questions early in the test will be directed to questions that are less complex or challenging. Students performing to a higher level of the test will be asked questions that are more complex. Tailored testing allows students to demonstrate what they know and encourages students to stay engaged with the test. Let's look at some examples of how students experience tailored testing. Marco and Lucy begin with questions that largely test the same range of difficulty. Marco is finding some questions difficult early in the test, so he is directed to a few questions that are less complex. Marco has an opportunity to demonstrate what he knows. Lucy is performing better in the test, so she is presented with some questions that are more complex. She is challenged and less likely to become bored because the questions are too easy. This means both Marco and Lucy are connecting with the test in a positive way. Both have an opportunity to better demonstrate their range of literacy and numeracy skills. Tailored testing will also provide teachers and schools with more targeted and detailed information on their students' performance on the tests.
Okay, so did you get that? In the first section of the video, ACARA are saying that ICSEA ranks schools to each other according to their socioeconomic student status of their students. So they rename privilege to advantage, but basically the rich white kids schools have a higher standard than the poorer schools, the state schools or whatever. So they're not compared to each other. You can't find out what's a good school. You can't tell whether the school down the road from you is a great school or it's a crap school. I mean, tell me it isn't racist to say because there are more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students here, this school doesn't have to achieve as high. I read an amazing essay by C.S. Lewis that was written back in the 50s, I think, about education. And he said that education is largely, or the quality of education is largely dependent on the student, someone who either wants to learn or doesn't want to learn. The essay is called Democratic Education. It speaks directly to this issue. It's an amazing essay that I just read the other night. I think it was last night. So ACARA is jimmying the system so that you can't differentiate between quality of schools anymore. But also, not only that, when individual students are being tested in NAPLAN, if they're not doing so well, they're given easier questions. I mean, that's nuts. What does that tell you? It doesn't make any sense. As a standard information tool, it doesn't make any sense to do that because you have no understanding of what the school needs to do. You can only say, Jimmy knows these things. You can't say, Jimmy doesn't know these things. So what are you supposed to teach him then? We're supposed to teach him what he already knows. Great. So if he's not good at reading, he's probably not going to get much better because you're focusing on his strengths. Oh, you're so wonderful. So it's a bit dodgy. And notice the hypnotizing nature of the videos where it's like, you know, the boy is obviously the one doing worse and the girl is doing better. But don't worry, we're fair with Jimmy too. Jimmy can get a couple of easy questions so that he can feel good that he finished. This is where we get into something called social emotional learning. So the Freire model is the foundational model of the entire Australian national curriculum. It is the scaffolding upon which the other things are built. And as you can see, there's a big push towards emotions and society, changing society. And in order to achieve that, they're going to need to infuse the schools. So if you've got the teachers bringing up stressful things and introducing strange words to students, which is probably what's going to happen, students are going to be a bit stressed out because I was preparing to do art and then all of a sudden we're talking about nude people and sexuality. I don't know that that's going to happen, but there's a possibility there because generative themes is what the students ask the teacher. There's an implied intimacy in that relationship, and you'll see that intimacy magnified in what's called social emotional learning. And that is where the psychologists come into the school in the form of teachers. Yes, those teacher psychologists, they're already radicalizers. Now they're going to be psychologists as well. So let's look for social emotional learning. Kids matter. Of course they do.
The Collaborative for Academic, Social and Emotional Learning, or CASL, leads research into ways for children to achieve better academic success and personal well-being, and has identified 5 key social and emotional competencies. We're going to look at all of them, but let's start here. Self-awareness is a child's ability to understand themselves and identify the emotions that he or she is feeling. Closely linked with self-awareness is the next social and emotional competency, self-management. If a child can recognize the emotions he is experiencing, then with support from others, he can learn to cope with things that don't go to plan. Now, we're going to look at social awareness. Social awareness is a child's ability to show understanding and empathy
Woke is
for
a
others.
slang for
It is
social.
her ability to place herself in other people's shoes and to think about how her actions may affect other people.
That idea of social awareness or empathy, it's a fundamental skill. On one level, empathy is something that's quite innate in most people. It's really that innate ability to actually pick, this person's angry, this person's aggressive, this person's friendly. People are generally very good at that. But there's another level of empathy is, what does that mean? So I can sort of pick up how that person feels. Why might they be feeling like that? Why might they be behaving like that? That sort of thing. Now, that's quite a sophisticated thinking skill. And once again, some links to that whole idea of your capacity to develop your thinking. You tend to get better at empathy, I think, as your thinking skills develop, because you have to have that rich imagination. You have to be able to put yourself in other people's shoes.
Bethany, how do you think Louis is feeling in this picture?
Upset and sad because his friend's moving away.
The next competency is relationship skills, which is about getting along with others, working in teams, and dealing effectively with conflict. Now we're going to look at the final key competency. Responsible decision making is about how to take the time to consider choices and thinking enough about consequences to make the best one.
The 5 competencies are really the basis to really knowing how to negotiate life. They're the basis for actually being able to have some insight into who I am. They're the basis for having some insight on my behaviour, being able to manage my behaviour. If you're trying to talk to kids about their behaviour, then they need to have basic competencies around social and emotional learning to be able to negotiate your life in a democratic society, to be able to operate in a workplace, or to be able to have a family. These are just fundamental skills. And instead of saying to kids, don't do this, actually show them this is what we want you to do. What you find is, overwhelmingly, kids will do it.
Kids will do it. Sure, they will, especially when the relationship between the teacher and the students is intentionally moving towards intimacy, and that there needs to be all this dialogue between the student and the teacher. Social emotional learning has 5 key competencies. You need to be a competent social person. Notice I know that I cut it this way, but social awareness and key decision making were extended in the info video. There is nothing wrong with a form of social emotional learning that this comes from. CASEL developed it. CASEL is an American organization. What they developed it from was a situation in which kids that had really poor social skills, they had antisocial behavior disorders and other things like that, maybe some personality disorders. Anyway, they were having some problems identifying their emotions. They were just flying into rages all the time. They had real problems. And this focusing on your emotions and becoming self-aware and all those other things was really helpful for them. So they used that evidence to justify bringing it in, transforming it, and putting it into schools. Now, just because it worked for some people who there wasn't really a lot of hope for, doesn't mean you should now teach it to kids that don't have any troubles, and now you're all of a sudden having weird conversations about their emotions. It's teacher-led. SEL from CASEL, you know what? I'll just let the people from CASEL tell you about their emotional program. Because not only teachers are taking students away from education, from learning stuff with the generative themes and the cross-curriculum priorities, but now all of a sudden, and this is where all the data harvesting comes in, and you saw with ACARA, there's lots of data harvesting here about, the students' families, their socio-economic situation. It's required to give all this information over, and they store that information. And in social emotional learning, the teachers develop assessments or observations about your child in school, and they keep that information. So let's hear the CASEL organization in America talk about themselves and their own program that they sold to Australia.
Welcome Melissa Schlinger and Justina Schlund to join me. Melissa is Vice President of Practice and Programs at CASEL. She leads CASEL's efforts to advance the
Americans talk
implementation of
fast.
high-quality social and emotional learning in districts and schools across the nation. And Justina Schlein is Senior Director of Content and Field Learning at CASEL. She oversees content strategy of all CASEL publications and platforms to deepen and expand SEL knowledge across the education field.
So Melissa, which is it? Is SEL about skills development, or is it really focused on how do you develop that supportive environment?
I'm so glad you asked, Justina. And the answer to this question, of course, is yes. It is both about the skill development and the supportive environment. And so I want to take a minute to just walk through CASEL's framework that identifies the skills and the environment. So when we think about the skills, when we talk about SEL competence, we really think about these 5 areas. In orange, we really think about the skills that have to do with ourselves. And also related to the self is self-management. So like, what do we do with that information? How do we manage those emotions? How do we manage those impulses? How do we manage the stress that we're experiencing? When we get to this green area, these 2 buckets are really about others and how we understand others. So social awareness is like self-awareness, but here we're really talking about, are we able to really appreciate diversity? Are we able to understand the norms of the situations that we're in? Are we able to both experience and cultivate a sense of belonging for everyone? That's about how we really think about and perceive others. And then the relationship skills is what we do with that. So this is more about our behaviors. And then putting that all together is responsible decision making. And here is where we're talking about, do we remain curious and open and really work to identify problems and think about consequences and those consequences and how they may be different consequences for different groups, and how do we behave ethically in this moment? So all of these are the different ways that CASEL has categorized important social and emotional learning skills into these 5 buckets of competence. So of course, our environments include how we are engaging with each other in a classroom and what kinds of experiences we're having there, what kinds of things are happening throughout the school building, and what are we observing about how kids and adults are interacting with each other and with us? How are we authentically partnering with families, and what's happening at home, and how does that impact our the way that we perceive things in other places? So whose job is this then to promote the social and emotional development of young people? Is it the job of the teachers? Is it the job of families? Are they getting this in their faith-based environments? Is this the job of sports coaches?
Well, the answer, of course, is yes. All of the above. Switching gears a little bit to think about the how do we actually teach social and emotional learning, right? Is it through explicitly sitting down with students and talking about social and emotional skills, the ones that you talked about before? Or is it really through just integrating different ways to practice and collaboration and teamwork and reflection into the academic content?
Well, of course, the answer to that is yes. It is important to do both. Know that as kids develop these social and emotional learning competencies, they are better equipped to work with each other and process the content. So it's really important to think about all learning as a social and emotional process, and to think about really allocating time both to do the explicit instruction and to do some integration. So explicit instruction, when we're talking about explicitly taking time to teach a lesson where the ultimate goal of that lesson is to build an SEL skill, those lessons, and they're done all the way from pre-K through high school, those might look like identifying and naming emotions, or perspective taking, empathy. If you were going to explicitly teach perspective taking, for example, you might be really focusing on some specific scenarios that are age appropriate and asking your students kind of to consider the different points of view reflected in that scenario, and to really try to practice putting yourself in the shoes of the different perspectives in the scenario so that they can think through and get practice with sort of stepping outside of their own emotions and trying to apply what's happening to themselves and thinking like what they might imagine this person feeling. And then back to this example of perspective taking that I gave earlier, this is a great, an opportunity that happens in every subject to practice perspective taking. So if you're teaching any event in history, you might want to examine explicitly what are the different perspectives of the different groups or different individuals in this historical context, and how do these events affect different people? Is it for children, or is it for the adults who work with children?
These aren't tough questions anymore, but of course the answer here is yes, right? I was thinking about talking about this sort of way to do schooling, way of education, but we also talk about social emotional learning a lot as a program that schools might adopt. So which is it, Melissa? Is SEL a program, or is it just the way we do school?
Is SEL a program or the way we do school? The answer, of course, is yes, school. So when we talk about the way you do school, this is really the way we talk about this in CASEL is a systemic approach infused into the systems of everything that's happening, aka the way we do school.
Major concerns about social emotional learning are that it is a move away from academic education and an emphasis that is not healthy on attitudes, values, beliefs, and mindsets of children. And there's great subjectivity and difficulty even among adults to agree on those things. Social emotional learning is a major danger to academic achievement, to privacy, to health. There's a major concern about the scientific accuracy of this. The research base just is not there, despite all of the claims by proponents. What is especially concerning about SEL assessment is that the data from those assessments, which is often collected without parental knowledge or consent, is put into state longitudinal databases that can follow children for life.
SEL represents the continued minimization of true academic work with very little research basis to back it up. A second finding is the substantial and troubling problems and consequences of SEL, especially to student privacy, to autonomy, individuality, and even freedom over their own futures. Now, a few examples of that. First, with respect to implementation. Many of these programs are essentially psychological evaluations performed not by professionals who have had many years of training to do this, but by already overburdened teachers and administrators who are given a little training and then told to go and improve children's psyches and personalities. The assessment of children under these programs is admitted even by the most enthusiastic SEL proponents to be hit or miss. And these amateur evaluations will presumably be included in the student's school data files. Another problem, mistaken evaluations can lead to serious consequences to children, putting many of them on the road to further unnecessary evaluations or mistaken diagnoses, and perhaps even dangerous psychotropic medications that are already overprescribed in this country. And then I think our third central finding is that through SEL, the government is grossly overstepping its boundaries to supposedly benefit society and the economy in particular. By what right does the government presume to administer psychological and mental health evaluations to children, perhaps without their parents' permission? By what right does government decide what is the correct personality for a free American citizen? By what right does government seek to transform a free citizen into the person that the government deems most useful to the state and to corporations?
Indeed. Social emotional learning in the schools, the role of the teacher to be a leader, a generative, a facilitator, an emotional confidant, so that the kids can say their most inner secrets. What is this curriculum stealing from parents? I want to have those conversations with my kids. It's not your job. But if I send my kid to school, I won't be able to refuse. As you heard, the cross-curriculum priorities, I'll probably get that wrong till the end of my life. Cross-curriculum priorities, compulsory. All teachers have to do it. So if I send my kid to school, it's going to be done to them. They're going to have to go through this. Why? Why can't some of the schools not do it? Because then those schools, they'll do better and they'll make the government look bad, and we won't get all these better people and better society, and we won't achieve the Sustainable Development Goals for the UN. They are stealing your kids' education, time away from learning. They are stealing your relationship with your children, because all of those elements are supposed to be your prerogative as parents, and they are stealing the future of Australia and indeed the world, because this is very big in India and America and the UK. They are stealing the intellectual future of the world. That's what they're doing by this. This isn't an Australian thing, this curriculum. This is a global curriculum. Julia Gillard is on the forefront of advocating for universal education. Now, she is a very skilled deceiver, but she makes it sound like universal suffering. Universal suffrage. Everybody gets to have a vote. Everybody gets to have education. But what she means is this model of education all over the world. There's a lot of Americans who moved to Australia to take part, or to take some of the rivers of cash that has been splashed around to develop this curriculum. One of them is in a video that I'm going to show you very soon. But let's talk about simulacrum. Or simulacra. Simulacra means a false reality, a representation of reality. And Marxists do this all the time. They love it. If they can corner or play logical games to make something good seem bad, they're going to do it. They don't care. And this is what we're seeing. We're seeing that a fake reality, getting kids and people away from talking face to face with each other and getting into the community and talking to each other in the community to find out how the community really is, by talking to people in the community, talking to older people in the community, I can't get to talk to an Aboriginal, even if I wanted to, and I do want to. I want to talk to lots of Aboriginals, but I can't access them because they've been kept away. All right. Our world is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. We're not allowed here. We're not allowed there. We're all pushed towards social media and other things to do our interacting. We're losing the ability to gauge for ourselves what society is like. And so what is being created is a false reality. In a fictional novel, the writer gets to dictate everything about the characters. If the writer wants to make every white person a racist, he can, and he can do it in a really believable way. If he wants to make all women victims, he can. He doesn't have, the fiction writer doesn't have to face reality. They can create reality. And it's the same with the information that schools are producing. They're creating cartoons and other things like that, and they're being allowed to communicate a tailored reality to students in school, and that's wrong. And it robs the student, or it brainwashes the student into thinking that reality is like school. And it's not. And it gives them moral information so that they're sensitized to certain things and they're desensitized to certain other things. I wonder how long it will take before some of the kids start expressing anger and rebellion. And I don't think this is going to work as well as they think it is. So on that sense of simulacrum is all the different pseudo realities that have been created, and one of them is apps. Everything's app. Kids do this app. You get a login and a password and do this survey, and they data collect all this stuff from your kids at school. This is where we're going. Let me show you this video. This is related to social emotional learning. Your kids putting information into apps about their deepest thoughts, and those being stored by certain organizations to add to the pool of information that they're storing on your kids' emotional and social well-being, they call it.
Hi, I'm Tammy-Ann Caldwell. I am a teacher of 10 years with a passion for students' social and emotional learning. I am excited about a new social emotional e-learning program for young people, Accepting Myself, how to help young people feel worthwhile no matter what.
Getting to know your positive points will help you appreciate yourself and help you cope when challenging things happen.
This program has been developed by
This
Professor
guy's
Michael
American, by
Bernard
the way.
and a team of educators, including me. Michael is the founder of You Can Do It Education, and he works with the University of Melbourne's Centre for Wellbeing Science. This e-learning program focuses on strengthening young people's self-acceptance, a type of psychological superpower that can help young people think about and evaluate themselves as worthwhile, no matter what happens. The online Accepting Myself program consists of 3 parts, each with interactive activities, and takes less than 60 minutes to fully complete. Using a computer or iPad, young people receive a login to the e-learning program to work through on their own, either at school or at home. The program takes place in outer space, with the learner selecting one of 2 avatars to guide them on a journey through the universe.
Hey, I'm Nova.
Hi, I'm Mars. Throughout the program, the learner is provided with tools, techniques, and examples to learn how to accept themselves. Learners download an interactive Accepting Myself toolkit upon completion of the program. The toolkit contains a variety of activities that help them independently practice and strengthen their self-acceptance. So, what can you expect from young people participating in this program? Well, despite their tendencies to take things personally, the good news is they can learn that they have the power to change the way they think about themselves and strengthen their self-acceptance. After completing this program, young people should show greater self-awareness, self-management, self-worth, and independence, resilience, and confidence. Most of all, they should be happier in themselves.
They should be happier in themselves. That's the hope anyway. You heard the American lady critic of social emotional learning say the research on this is questionable. It's just not there. These people that are developing these things, if they're not grifters, they're true believers. And the amount of positivity, just everything is work and it's going to be this and it's going to be amazing and your kids are going to learn about themselves and they're going to be better at education, they're going to be better at learning, they're going to be social change warriors, everything is positive all the time. There's nothing bad about any of this. What happens if someone kills themselves? You know what the pandemic taught us? Victim blaming. Something wrong with him, or there's something wrong with the kids in the school, or someone persecuted him, or whatever. He was oppressed. Everybody's not learning social emotional learning. There is a massive amount of guilt and shame attached to social emotional learning because it uses guilt and shame as an internal wall to shape the behavior of someone to the outside world. And these simulacrums present a situation where you are going to be inundated with a postmodern doctrine so that you can't actually interact with the world. Your feelings of anger or other things are going to be locked away because you socially can't behave that way. There's going to be this wall with people. Now, when I interviewed John Loeffler, he said to me about the people that he'd met and talked with who are postmoderns. He said many postmoderns know inside there's something wrong, but they can't break out. They can't break through because social emotional learning, like postmodernism, is a prison for your mind where you can't be you. You can't be you. You have to be part of the collective. You have to attribute worth from your identity group. You have to be part of the consensus. Consensus is what makes truth. That's why for everything that society wants you to do or the government want you to do these days, they have a plethora of scientific studies saying it's amazing, there's nothing bad, and there's only one little study over here that says it could be really dangerous, but that's just one and they ignore it. There's a lot of things that happened during COVID that could tip us off to how this all this stuff in the curriculum gets played out. Hey, now we're going to go to the last video, the last big section. So far we've looked at the core model, which is Paulo Freire's problem posing approach, where the cross-cultural curriculum or the cross-curriculum priorities are going to be embedded into the subjects so that it takes time away from learning the actual syllabus. Then we have the social emotional learning stuff, which is very much religious in its ideas about reality and about the relationship between parents and children and the relationship between teacher and children. There seems to be a bit of a reversal there. Now we're going to look at what I think is a major religious component of the schools. Now, I personally think that our schools have been turned into religious cult centers. Basically, they have moved significantly away from learning maths and English and literacy in its traditional sense. They redefined literacy into a Marxist definition, and now literacy means to be able to see power and the dialectic everywhere. But they're also putting in some, they're kicking out the Christians. They hate the Christians. And they're putting in something called mindfulness. You've probably heard mindfulness. You might even love mindfulness. You might even meditate every week, and that's your right. You can do that. In fact, I want to fight for your right to have mindfulness meditation. But when they start teaching kids and they don't have to tell the parents that they're doing it, that they're teaching their kids mindfulness meditation, I, as a Christian, have a problem with that. And I did have a problem with that with my son's kindergarten. When I told them that I didn't want my son doing yoga and mindfulness meditations, they fought me. The parent saying, I don't want my child to do this, wasn't enough for them. They fought me. And because my son is so amazingly likable and they loved him so much, they decided, or at least they told me, that they wouldn't do the Cosmic Kids program of yoga and meditation, basically teaching my child Buddhism and Hindu practices. They wouldn't do that. They would find another way to get the kids to move their bodies. I even offered some suggestions of what they could go to. But yeah, they weren't having it. So mindfulness meditation, a massive part of the curriculum. Okay? This is Smiling Minds. This is part of the National Australian curriculum. Here we go. Note this, okay?
The human brain is a profoundly complex organ. 90% of its activity occurs beneath conscious awareness, which means that even though we assume that we have some control of how we think, feel, and behave, modern science suggests it's not so simple. The concept of neuroplasticity is a new and exciting area of science. It highlights that our brain is constantly being reshaped throughout our lives by both our experiences and our thoughts. We now know that it is the focus of our awareness that determines which brain networks are strengthened and which are weakened or lost. If we practice being calm, clear, and focused, we can strengthen these networks too. As humans, our brain differs from other animals. This is mostly due to the front areas of the brain called the frontal lobes. Often called, when well developed, this part of our brain helps us to manage our strong emotions and respond with flexibility, even when we feel overwhelmed. It also helps us to tune into the feelings of others with empathy and insight. When we feel worried, distracted, or stuck on achieving goals, our brain function is more strongly dominated by our old brain, which has a part called the amygdala. The amygdala manages the powerful fight and flight response, which switches on when we feel stressed or anxious and releases hormones and chemicals such as cortisol and adrenaline. That is why stress has such a big impact on us. Mindfulness is a technique that can help us to manage this process more effectively by building our skills of attention, concentration, and a capacity to direct our awareness in a certain way. This all means that we're less likely to be swept up by a strong emotion and the power of the amygdala. It also means we can bring choice to our emotions and our thoughts. In doing so, we're playing an active role in changing the way the structure of our brain develops, in much the same way we can change the shape of our body by doing certain exercises at the gym. When we practice meditation regularly, we build a capacity to become aware of thinking and emotion. As our mind becomes more settled, our nervous system is able to take in more accurate information, and we can access capacities for creativity, flexibility, and lateral thinking, which enable us to manage challenging situations more skillfully. When we build skills of mindfulness, we still experience negative feelings like frustration, disappointment, fear, or irritability. But the research shows that we recover much more quickly. We now know from research into brain development that regular meditation and mindfulness practice reduces the size of the amygdala, reduces levels of stress hormones, and strengthens connections to the frontal lobes. This all means that we're more likely to live with less stress and more happiness.
Smiling Mind is modern meditation. Our vision is to see mindfulness meditation on the school curriculum by 2020. The Smiling Mind app and education programs are freely accessible to all.
Hi, my name's James Tutton. I'm one of the two founders of Smiling Mind with my friend Jane Martino. And I jokingly say it came about for me through a positive midlife crisis. Right at that point in time, I was looking for a tool to teach my kids Cass and Harper meditation. Smiling Mind ostensibly is about meditation, but for me, meditation is really a pathway through to mindfulness. And that's the awareness of your presence in a physical sense and in a spiritual sense. And just by bringing oneself into the moment, the flow and positive impacts to all manner of aspects of your life are really quite remarkable. And that's something which, on the one hand, is supported by a whole bunch of research.
Expect depression, expect suicidal thoughts. Expect sometimes to have waves of insanity and madness. You might feel like you're losing your mind, and you actually have this weird energy moving through you, and you start to behave as though your body is being controlled by a puppet master.
Hey guys, Steve here. In this video, we're going to talk about meditation in a way you've probably never heard it spoken about before. Is it possible that there's a dangerous, more sinister reality behind meditation that is being deliberately swept under the rug? And what if clinical research actually proves that meditation is psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually dangerous? To some people, this may sound like a typical Christian paranoia, especially coming from an ex-New Ager such as myself. After all we ever hear about is how meditation can improve sleep, how it can reduce stress, how it can improve creativity. Over 75% of meditation studies that are performed don't ask participants to report any negative effects they experience. But when subjects are asked to report negative effects, or when they're tested specifically for negative effects, the results are beyond disturbing. The following dangers apply to all techniques, and we know this because the studies we are about to look at include reports from each of these methods. This is an absolute staple practice in Eastern religions and in the New Age movement. A new study published in 2017 on the negative effects of meditation, led by Dr. Willoughby Britton, professor of psychiatry and human behavior at Brown University. 18% reported suicidality, 17% reported emotional detachment, and 17% said that they experienced something so severe that it required inpatient hospitalization. Now, before we close, one more notable danger of meditation is that it promotes deception. When we are in an altered state of consciousness and when our brainwave state has been fundamentally changed, we are more likely to believe things about the world and about ourselves that we normally wouldn't believe. You may end up believing that you are God, that the trees are God, but that you have lived many past lives. Likewise, altering your consciousness and brainwaves through meditation causes you to become prone to deceptions at a psychological level, but also because of any supernatural influence that may be at work in your practice.
And I think I got into it in a very similar way to most people, which is that I had like a life crisis. A friend of mine committed suicide when I was in college, and I developed a kind of, quasi anxiety disorder and thought I was too young to start on medication. And my dad sent me A Path with Heart, which is a book by Jack Kornfield, and that was my gateway drug. I did my dissertation on looking how meditation impacted sleep, and did one of the first studies on biologically recorded sleep, so brainwave-based sleep, and basically found the exact opposite of what I hypothesized. So I thought that, meditation is relaxing, it should make you sleep better. Maybe that's how it improves depression, and we actually found that it didn't make people sleep better at all. They thought they slept better, but their brains were actually much more activated. So I think that was maybe the first step towards where I am now, which is our assumptions coming from a kind of health orientation or psychological treatment orientation towards meditation are often wrong. And then I was talking about the results on a retreat like many years later. And the teacher on the retreat was like, she's like, everyone knows that meditation, if you do it enough, like makes you stop sleeping. So I don't know what's wrong with these psychologists. You're always trying to make it into this like relaxation technique. And so I did publish the data, and I started asking meditation teachers more about, well, what else should I know about? And what other little stories are you hiding? So much research on the benefits and the health benefits. It's like overwhelmingly, that's what the research is about. But nobody's really asked any questions about the more challenging states or just simply states that don't fit the criteria of health benefits. They're just weird things that happen. Which are very well documented in the Buddhist texts, but in terms of modern scientific research, almost entirely untouched. So that was 2007, and it took us 10 years to ask that question and analyze 3,000 pages of interviews, but we finally published it in 2017. So that was, and we're still going. There's lots more on that particular study. So our knowledge about this topic is trickling in from different sources, and with any research, the way you design the research and pick your sample and the questions you ask kind of determine what kind of conclusions you can make. Of the meditators who were reporting various kinds of problems or challenging experiences, they were not on retreat, and they were meditating less than an hour a day. So even in that study, we did see some evidence that it did not require intensive retreat time. Since then, I run a organization called Cheetah House, which is a nonprofit that supports meditators in distress. And we have had hundreds and hundreds of people call and ask for support. So now we have another sort of non-research sample, but we have a sense of, what other types of conditions can produce problems. And we're actually seeing quite a few app users. So I make a policy of not mentioning specific apps by name, but we'll just say that, some of the most popular ones are definitely showing up at Cheetah House.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. Okay, Dr. Brittany said that, these side effects are rare, maybe 4%. something like that. I can't remember exactly the number, but it's low. But here's the thing, 4%, that's 4 out of 100. How many school kids are in 3-year-old kinder in the whole state of Victoria, learning mindfulness meditation, doing it every day they're at school for 15 minutes? Parents told, hey, your kids are going to be doing some mindfulness meditation. These are some of the side effects that you might want to watch out for. If they're starting to get depressed, they're starting to have weird thoughts. No, there's nothing. Just like certain injections that some people were trying to make us have. Now, I'm not trying to be a conspiracy theorist, and I'm not trying to be someone who says, you know, meditation is bad because it's not part of my religious worldview or right. I'm not doing that. What I'm saying is that it's completely unethical to go into schools and to train kids in religious and spiritual practices without telling them the side effects or problems or other things, without even consenting their parent or asking their parents for consent. Now, I even looked up some Hindu and Buddhist people, mainly Hindu, and they said they were quite open about the negative effects and the things and the dangers. And but the teachers aren't. The psychologists, they aren't coming forward with it. An old friend of mine who has her PhD, she was part of a study about how wonderful meditation is and all the benefits. Now, her study wouldn't have been able to find any negative aspects, even if there were some, because the study wasn't designed that way to be able to find anything like that, because they weren't looking for the bad stuff. They were only trying to make a study that served the consensus, because that was the only way that they were going to get the funding so that they could get their wages. This is how the system gets jimmied. And the consensus thinking. So you're pumping the kids with this idea that consensus makes truth. Consensus makes truth. And then they get older and the scientific community says consensus makes truth. But you don't have the skills to be able to evaluate a study. And the people who, you didn't hear this in the video, but Dr. Brittany was saying how she was scared to publish her findings because it didn't match what she was supposed to find. She thought, because, you know, she wanted her career, but she ended up publishing anyway in 2017. And there are other studies. That's just one. Now, there's only a handful, to be sure. But when you look at those glowing studies and those glowing things that Smiling Mind and other people like that are trying to get in schools, there's no negative. There's no negative. There's no possibility of a negative. And if you notice, that guy, that founder of Smiling Mind, he wanted to teach his kids a certain type of meditation. Wonderful. But what makes him so arrogant to think that he can come into schools and teach my kids meditation? I don't care if it's good results. I've just shown you that there is a possibility of not good results. The idea, and I've run into this a number of times over the last 20 years, where religions like Baha'i and some of the Buddhist religions and other things like that, they develop these school programs, and they take all of the language illustrating that it's a religion out of it. Buddhists even say that our religion isn't a religion, even though it's legally defined as a religion in Australia. That's how they can lie to your face. But they're not lying, because they believe it within the boundaries of their worldview. And they make these programs and they try to get into schools. And the Marxists do the same thing. They're always trying to get the kids. Always, always, always going for the kids, the most vulnerable, the people who are not able to put up a to don't have the understanding to to understand how to differentiate between sarcasm, between truth and lie. They don't have the defenses, and they're away from their parents because they're at school. And they're being bombarded with all of these ideas, like meditation, like the social emotional learning stuff, like the cross curriculum priorities. And you saw that movie, that video about kids, their mind being malleable, neuroplasticity. They are trying to get the kids early so that they can create those pathways in their brain. It's not easy to overcome that later. It's hard to undo habits and things that are formed when you're a kid, patterns of thought when you're a kid. When I was a kid, I think I was in grade 3 when I asked my parents what homosexuality was. I didn't know the word. I just knew some men had sex with other men, and I wondered how that worked. I have no idea where I got the idea. But if I didn't get the idea, I wouldn't have asked the question. And because of the situation, I asked my mum, and she answered me. In this, you're going to be drawn into asking the teacher for the benefit of the whole class. So that now that, imagine if some kid goes to school in grade 2 or grade 1 and says, Santa Claus isn't real, I'm exposing the lies. That kid will be seen as, oh, you're destroying things. That's so wrong. But if another kid comes in and wants to talk about, some experience they had, they do that in front of all the kids, so all the kids get to hear it. So that the whole class together can talk about it, and they can understand it, and they can feel good about it. And the teacher is the one that facilitates all of this. Now, someone asked me before, do teachers realize that what they're participating in? Yes. If you look at the school books, the university texts, it is clearly there. But here's the problem. The teachers that are learning this in universities, they don't have anything to compare it to. This is just the way things are. Unless they have another worldview, like a firm Christian worldview, maybe they might not take it on and realize that there's something wrong. But if you read the text, it's very clinical. And that's what they're turning the schools into, a clinical environment where they're being experimented on with social emotional learning, and they're having things done to them, led into things like meditation and yoga. And the subjects to really watch out for in high school is phys ed. I have watched hours and hours of lectures and info sessions about phys ed, physical education in high school. And that is where they are pumping some really interesting stuff. Phys ed, I just thought you were running around doing sports and learning how to play football. No. Phys ed is one of the big ones where you would be scared of. If you were scared of the curriculum already, phys ed is where all the nightmares are. And here's the other thing about Simulacrum. There are so many non-government agencies, there's so much funding floating around that there are organizations that are coming up with programs to lead your children, your high school kids, away. Now, some of them are endorsed by the ABC. Some are funded by the Victorian Board of Education. But they use social media, TikTok, other apps, other things like that to get the kid alone in the app to be taught interesting and wonderful and strange things by other young people that are a bit older. This will be the last video if I can find it. Yeah, I've got it here. So none of these are actually part of the curriculum. But these are some of the third party. The Simulacra video too was a third party. My Smiling Mind is part of the curriculum, definitely. But these ones you're about to see, these are third party ones. These are making use of the funding that comes from the Victorian government to do these things, but they're not actually under the umbrella of the Victorian Education Department. So these are what I call the ushering into certain identities that Freire's model promotes, the action reflection, do something, then think about it, and meditation, and designed to change your mind. Sorry, I'm just going to ramble on for a little bit more. When you go to your teacher and you say, hey, you're moving into puberty, you've passed all this meditation stuff and all this social emotional learning in primary school and pre-K and 3-year-old kinder, 4-year-old kinder, whatever. They're training maternal nurses to train parents to do it from birth, but you've gone through primary school of this program and then you hit puberty and you start to wonder whether or not you're gay, not because you have any feelings necessarily, just because you're searching for an identity and you were taught lots of things and lots of words and lots of concepts when you were in primary school, when you didn't even know that they existed. And now you've got this head full of these ideas. And now you've got the hormones that relate to puberty. You don't think there's going to be some problems? Anyway, well, here's where you can find your salvation. Here's where you can find your tribe.
To mind.
Most of us are taught the idea
that people are born a boy or a girl.
And we're expected to act a certain way based on what's between our legs. But that actually isn't true for everyone.
It totally ignores the huge and amazing world of people who are trans and gender diverse.
And that's what we're going to dive into in this series.
Being trans, gender identity, and what it's all about.
Welcome to Trans 101.
You taught the history of LGBTQ+ in school. Many people weren't, so we decided to teach ourselves. Welcome to Rainbow History class.
Hey guys, I'm Jazz, and on this episode of Feeling It, we're going to be talking about, you guessed it, feelings.
Do you really want your kids talking to her about their feelings? Do you really want her defining concepts for your child about feelings? I want to, if my child is LGBT, I want to be part of their life. I want to be the one going through things with them. I don't want them to be ushered into this community where they learn how to be a Marxist. That's the thing that is the wrong here. They are being taught a worldview without knowing it. They're being indoctrinated into something they don't know. Here's the great thing about Christians. You know they're Christians. They'll always tell you they're Christians. You'll always know you're going to a Christian organization. You'll always know you're in a Christian class. I'm a Christian. You'll always know it. They're not hiding. Marxists, on the other hand, no. Because they believe it's reality and no other reality is quite possible. And they're not interested in choice. Not interested in choice at all. There's no individual in the Marxist idea unless you're a leader. They want to teach your child, as Rose Ward says, I want to teach your child how to be gay and a communist. The funding that we give to the Victorian government. Look, we've been going for a while. I think we should stop. They're the major things. The Freirean model, critical theories and all that sort of stuff, as I said before, the Freirean model, the social emotional learning, and the meditation and mindfulness and New Age religion. If you want some technical words, it's Gnostic and Hegelian religion. But most people don't know that. They just know it as New Age. The thing unifying this whole curriculum is that everybody involved, it's right, they are politically different. There are technocrats and there are Marxists and there are psychologists who are probably technocrats, secularists, whatever. There are. But here's the unifying principle. All of the people that seem to be involved in this national curriculum are utopian, heading for a future perfect world. They're all socialists. They all believe in socialism. And the other thing about the curriculum is it's deceptive. They call it a 3D model. I call it deceptive, dishonest, and demonic. That's my 3D. Anyway, look, if anyone has any questions, you can put them up now. I think we've gone long. I wasn't sure exactly how long we would go because of the videos and because I wasn't as prepared. Oh, I've got a quote from Frederick Bastiat in The Law. Have a listen to this. Since the law organizes justice, the socialist asks why the law should not also organize labor and education and religion. Why can't the law organize religion? Why should not the law be used for these purposes? Because it could not organize labor, education, and religion without destroying justice. The role, this is me talking, the role of law is to organize the execution of justice. But if the law, this is what Frederick Bastiat is saying, the law, if it were to organize the way people work, the way people learn in schools, and the churches, if law was to organize all those things, you would destroy justice. This is a quote from Bastiat. We must remember that law is force. That is, consequently, the proper functions of the law cannot lawfully extend beyond the proper functions of force. Frederick Bastiat, writing in 1850, thereabouts, the best, most wonderful rebuttal of vanilla socialism that exists in literature. So how do we deal with this? You are not going to get away. You are not going to get away. It's everywhere. It'll be in workplaces. It's universal. They want this all the way through of all of life and society. What you're going to need to do is, if you can homeschool, that obviously would be one solution. And maybe we can talk on another podcast about how we do that. But if you can't homeschool, you really need to rediscover what it means to be a parent. You really need to spend time with your child, your children, talking through. Make sure that you win in the competition of affections between the teacher and the parent. Make sure you win. Make sure you have something that they can grab onto and hold on to. There's a trust there with you. Build the relationship. Build it as best as you can. If you have really young kids, one thing that you can do is when you read them books that have a honorable, strong, good hero. I grew up on cartoons like Transformers and He-Man and She-Ra and other things like that. Thundercats, where the good people were good and the evil people were evil. And honor and justice and honesty and integrity. These were the values that were in those characters. Find books that give them a sense of what a hero is. It's not a social justice hero. It's a person that has integrity in here, that treats people equally and fairly, not because it's the social standard, but because it's right. In the movie Flash Gordon in the late 70s, there was a doctor in that, a scientist in that show. One of the characters, his name was Hans Zarkov, and the aliens, the bad guys, were going to brainwash him, wipe his brain and wash it, turn him into an agent. It's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek satire of Lenin and the Russian Revolution. And it doesn't take on Zarkov. They try and wash his brain and it doesn't take, but he fakes it for a while so he can get away. And he said, one of the other characters said, "How did you get through it?" And he said, "I quoted Einstein, I quoted Shakespeare, everything that I could get from my education. I even quoted some lyrics from the Beatles. It armed me, girl." There is something wonderful about a classical education. There's something wonderful about honor and truth and justice. Some of my most favorite movies that helped bring me up as a kid, that armed me for today, were some of those movies like Superman with Christopher Reeves, like books like Gulliver's Travels and other amazing adventure novels. Just saturate your kids with those. Read it to them, but all in the context of building a relationship, a parental relationship with your kids, so that when they have a question, they come to you because you're available. So it's going to take maybe a lot of work in some people. And some people have strengths and weaknesses. Some people are good at this, good at that. But as far as getting out of school, getting through this, one thing they can do if your kids are in school, talk to the principal and say, if you don't want your kid to do meditation, you might want your kid to do meditation. That's absolutely fine. But if you don't, just say, hey, can we not do the meditation? What can I opt out of? When you take notes about my kids, make sure there's no identifying data. Remove his name. Talk to your school about, don't go and say, oh, the world's going to end. There's a big conspiracy theory. I heard it from Josh. This is their worldview. They don't see anything wrong with it. That's an overwhelming thing. It is not sinister to them. They are doing the most normal, good thing in the world. They really honestly believe they are making the world a better place. They see nothing wrong with any of this. The true believers. There are lots of grifters that are just looking for money. Like the third-party people that make apps and organizations. They're just looking for money or to push the Marxist thing. But go to your school. If you have kids in primary school or secondary school, say, hey, what can I opt out of? I know you're taking notes on my kid. Can you make sure that there's no identifying stuff? They might say, look, we can't do much. Just do the best you can. But while you're at home, spend time with your kids. Love them. Love them in a way that when they got questions, they know they can come to you. Let them know that. say these 3 things to your children every single day. I love you, no matter what, and even if. Let's see if I remember the second one. If you have any questions, make sure you come and ask me. And the third one, good luck out there. And good luck out there. It's not going to be easy. But good luck out there, because the world is not a utopian place and it never will be. And sooner or later, everyone's going to realize. But the thing is, just keep loving your kids. Do the best you can. Involve them in literature, ideas, books, old books, Moby Dick, the Bible if you can. Even if you're not a Christian, the Bible's a great book. Iliad, Odyssey, 10,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Jules Verne, whatever it takes. And look for positive role models, heroes. Lots of them in the Greek traditions. But heroes, don't let your kids watch modern cartoons. The ones during the 80s, characters weren't having these exaggerated emotions in cartoons. As soon as the 90s came, all these massive exaggerated emotions came. Now, they had exaggerated emotions back with the old Tom and Jerry cartoons and Daffy Duck and all those other things, right? But the ones that came out, the cartoons for kids that came out in the 90s, like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Samurai Pizza Cats and, all the ones where their eyes pop out of their head when they're surprised. And, it's just massively overt. That does not teach kids to manage their emotions. SEL doesn't teach kids to manage their emotions. SEL teaches kids to bring their emotions out into the air. I'm not saying, kids need to push it all down. What I'm saying is, like, when you talk to your child, model an appropriate level of emotional expression. And if a child is having a hard time with something, don't be more strict and harsh than you need to. Sit down with them, give them space, give them time. Sometimes it takes kids a long time to work out what they want to say because their vocabulary is still developing and they haven't been able to practice how to translate emotional information into words yet. Help them with having that developing that emotional vocabulary. But the people who organize national curriculum want the teachers to do all that. They want everything in the schools. The school's the new home and the teacher's a new parent. And a lot of that has to do with the UN and the International Declaration of the Rights of the Child, where it says that the state is responsible for the children within its nation or state or whatever, not the parent. Anyway, that's something for another thing. Are there any more questions before we sign off? Because I'm rambling and it's just all coming apart. Thank you for listening. Now, if you want to help me out to donate, that would be wonderful. The information is on the Facebook page, The Looking Glass, which I'm sure you're all from. If not, then you just get it for free. Because this is important. They have pumped so much money into this curriculum, into the developing of this natural curriculum. They are not just going to scrap it overnight. This is their goal to get to the 2030 UN millennial whatever goals, Agenda 2030. So this at least is going to be the curriculum until 2030. So do your best. Good luck. I love you. always, and even if, no matter what, or even if. What was that second one? If you have any questions, ask me. And good luck out there. I'll see you later. Now, have to work out how to leave. Oh, wait. I can't. There we go.